Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Broken Banquet, a podcast about missions. We are your hosts, Will Bailey and Dr. Ashley Goad, and we are so glad that you have joined us for another conversation about the church and missions, about what healthy mission relationships can look like, and as we hear from others who have dedicated their lives in one way or another to mission work. We're so glad you're here, and we hope you enjoyed this episode. Hey, Ashley.
Hey, Will.
How are you?
I am good. I am good. How are you?
I'm good. It's good to see you.
You too. How's everything going?
It's good. I have a story I want to share with you. I think it's a funny story.
I love a good story. Tell
Yeah,
me.
it might just be funny for me, but I'm going to tell you anyway. So a few weeks ago, I picked Isabella, our 8-year-old, up from school, and we were driving to my office, and she told me just out of the blue that she had decided that she wasn't ever going to have a boyfriend. And she said it was because she wants to be like her aunt. She has an aunt who's in her early 20s and isn't dating anyone and is just very serious about her schoolwork and about her career. And so Isabella said, this is my 8-year-old telling me I'm just going to focus on my education and my career. And I thought, wow. And she got quiet for a few seconds, and then she said, I don't think I'm ever going to get married either. And I thought, wow, this is kind of serious. Um, and she got quiet, and she said, it just it just seems like having a husband is exhausting. And I looked up into the rearview mirror, and she's like staring laser beams into my eyeballs. I thought, what in the world? Like, I kind of like, I like to think I'm a pretty low maintenance husband to her mother, but oh my gosh, what are they talking about when I'm not around?
What
So
is Yolanda telling to
uh,
Isabella?
for real. So I just sat there at the stoplight and laughed until I cried, and then, carried on with my day.
I love Isabella more and more with each passing day because I completely agree. Husbands are very high maintenance.
Oh man. Yeah, maybe you're the wrong one for me to be sharing this story with.
Oh my goodness. I have a funny story too. You want to hear my funny story?
Please, yes, anything after that.
Well, as you know, I went to Appalachian State University, and Appalachian State played Texas A&M in football on Saturday. And for all of you listeners, I know that we're several months past this already, but let me remind you that Appalachian State did beat Texas A&M in football, and Texas A&M was ranked number 6. It was the best day ever. And so the next day, I decided since I'm preaching in the contemporary worship service that I could totally get away with wearing an Appalachian State t shirt and a pair of jeans. And so I got to church on Sunday morning and I walk in my jeans and a t shirt. And our senior adult pastor comes up to me and says, Ashley, I have to leave for a graveside service. Is there any way that you can cover the communion service at noon today? And I was like, well, I'm not real sure because I'm preaching in the contemporary service and I don't know if I'll be able to get out in time, but I'll take care of it. Don't worry. So I did my morning duties as I always do. And we were down a couple of pastors that morning because a couple of folks were out. So I preached and then I finished up and I got over to the chapel and I was serving communion to our sweet ladies and older gentlemen who are always dressed to the nines in their southern best, and apologized to them for my casual wear. And we had a sweet little communion service. And as I was coming out of the chapel, another gentleman came up to me and said, Ashley, where is Carl? And I said, well, I know he had a graveside service afterwards, which is why I was doing the communion service. And he said, Ashley, we can't find him. We don't know where he is. And I said, well, I tell you what, let me just call him and see where he is. So I called him. He answered on the first ring. I was like, Carl, where are you? And he said, Ashley, I told you I'm at a graveside service. And I said, well, Carl, are you actually with the family? And he said, yeah, they're standing right here. I was like, so do you know that there's also supposed to be another service here at the church at 12:15? And he said, Ashley, oh no, I totally forgot. And so there was supposed to be an inurnment service in our columbarium at 12:15. And so the gentleman that's with me is like, Ashley, you have to come. I was like, well, let me go get a robe or something so that I can come down, not in my t-shirt and jeans. And he says, no, 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 just come on down. There's not many people here. So I walk downstairs in my t-shirt and jeans. I go downstairs and I went straight up to the podium and I went in with I had a worship service on my phone. So I pulled up the scripture and I got into the prayer and I said, and dear God, we give to you. I forgot to ask the name of the person. I forgot to ask the name of the person that we were putting in the columbarium. So I turned to the I turned to the man that was standing there. I said, "And who are we laying to rest today?"
So, did you even know if it was like a male or a female? Like, so you couldn't even say our dear brother or our dear sister. Nothing.
I didn't. I had no idea. And so thankfully they told me the name and oh my goodness, well, and then we, put the ashes in the columbarium and so ended my day. But oh my goodness, moral of the story, I will never, ever, ever wear a t-shirt and jeans to church again, ever.
Well, I have a couple of thoughts. First of all, if you get any hate mail or angry text messages from people who weren't happy with your attire, can we please read them on subsequent episodes of this podcast?
Most definitely.
And the other thing is, you're totally going to wear that T-shirt again next time Appalachian State beats somebody who's ranked. So, yeah.
That's a good point too. It was a great day, Will.
Well, I think it's good when things like that happen and kind of keep us humble for both of us. I have an 8-year-old daughter who keeps me humble, and you have a gigantic church full of people who need you for all kinds of different things who also keep you humble.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen.
Well, speaking of humble, how's that for a seg?
Ooh, fancy. You're getting better at this.
Uh, I sure hope so. Not long ago, you and I had the chance to talk to Nate Hutchison in New Zealand about the churches that they've planted there, and he mentioned during his interview several times his wife and what an important part of the team, the ministry team that Whitney is. And so we went back to them and actually did another interview, but with Nate and Whitney together. And I'm so excited that we get to share that with people today. So I'm not gonna talk anymore. We're gonna let them do some talking, and that's not true because I do talk in the interview, but you know what I mean. Let's get to it. This is our interview with Nate and Whitney Hutchison in New Zealand. Hey, Whitney. Hey, Nate. It is so good to have you guys with us on the Broken Banquet. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be a part of this. We're excited to have both of you on this episode. We had the privilege of spending some time with Nate a few weeks ago, and just we're so grateful that we get to hear more from the Hutchisons in New Zealand.
Thanks, Will. Glad to be here, man.
Thank you for having us.
When we talked to Nate for the previous episode, one of the things that he mentioned when we were talking about some of the challenges that you guys faced as church planters in New Zealand was how helpful it was having your perspective, Whitney, as a partner in in life and in ministry because of the academic work that you did around cultural sensitivity and cultural studies. So could you share with us a little bit about your background?
Sure. We both went to Kentucky Christian University in Grayson, Kentucky, and he was doing preaching and music, I think. And
Mm-hmm.
I kind of initially went there planning to only be there for 1 year and then transfer out to a secular university and do pre med. And so I was looking for any classes I could take at a tiny liberal arts Christian university that would actually transfer to a state university so I wouldn't have to repeat all of those credits later on. So my academic advisor suggested in my second semester that I take a class called Foundations of Intercultural Studies. And they got it approved because typically that's a second year class. They got it approved for me to take it as a freshman. So took the class with Dr. George Pickens and absolutely loved it. It kind of blew my mind out of the water. I had done several mission trips in high school, as you did back in the 90s. And had loved those experiences and had even thought I could see myself working overseas someday, and even kind of had a goal of living and working outside of the US. Even at that stage, I had thought if I did end up doing medicine, I would probably try to do that in some sort of missions capacity. So I took this class and absolutely loved it. I think it just spoke to a lot of aspects of my personality that I had never explored, like people watching. I had always been, a people watcher, but taking it beyond people watching to making interpretations, drawing conclusions from those observations, and how much we can learn about people and their culture just from spending an hour in a hardware store and writing down things that you observe and then drawing conclusions from those observations. I was all like, I'm a thinker, I'm contemplative. And so it was just like right up my alley. I loved it. And the things that we read were really helpful for me in putting a lot of my, mission trip experience into context, as well as starting to open up my mind to thinking about my own context as an American a lot differently, and to start to think more critically about my own cultural heritage and how people outside of America view Americans and what that means. And I just loved it. And so I ended up coming back and joining the intercultural studies program and got that degree. Meanwhile, Nate and I were dating and ended up,
I'm very glad she came back to school.
yeah, we started dating that second year. Ended up getting married after graduation, and he had taken a worship ministry position in Indianapolis, Indiana. And I thought, wow, you can't really get much further from the mission field. This is what I thought at the time, than Indianapolis, Indiana, but obviously the mission field is everywhere. And I quickly realized that when we got there. But I kind of had this moment where I had to decide, do I pursue this relationship with someone who has no desire to live overseas, has a desire to be close to his family, is really relationally close with his family, doesn't want to move out of the country? Do I pursue that, or do I pursue kind of my dream of moving overseas, maybe doing mission work in some capacity? And I chose to pursue the relationship and just said, one of the things we learned about in class was the important role of mobilizers. How one missionary may go overseas and impact 100 lives, but if a mobilizer sends out 10 people and each of those people impact 100 lives, that mobilizer is impacting exponentially more. And so I thought, okay, God, if my calling is to be a mobilizer and stay here in the States, if that's what you're asking me to do, that's what I'll do. It's not what I had pictured, but I'm willing to give that to you and move to Indiana and tried to apply for jobs at missions organizations, because there are quite a lot of them based in Indianapolis. None of them were really hiring. And so I just kind of had to take what jobs were available with a missions degree, which were not a lot in Indiana, and ended up working at the church there, which was great for learning some skills for working behind the scenes in churches, learning a lot of information about communications, all of which I ended up using later on the mission field.
Then we got an email from someone saying, hey, do you want to come plant churches in New Zealand? And I forwarded that on to Whitney. I was like, hey, where's New Zealand? And she was like, let's pray about this. And it turns out it was like the perfect combination of a mission field for both of us, which was unexpected.
Yeah, I think one of the things that made us realize this is different, this New Zealand thing is different, because I had looked into other possibilities and different opportunities had come up, but it was always something for me and didn't really include Nate. And he was, with his passion being worship, we kind of thought, how is he was very willing to sacrifice and say, yes, we can go try that if you feel like you want to do that. But it never really felt like we were both being called to something. It was always him or me. And this New Zealand thing came up, and it was actually him being contacted about planting churches, and my missions degree was a bonus, So I think we said to each other, this is different. This is something we really need to take seriously. This is something for both of us.
Took us about a year to decide for sure, and off we go to New Zealand.
That's really interesting to think about the sort of when you're talking about a missionary couple or a missionary family and a calling to the mission field, for that to feel like the same thing for everybody involved,
Mm.
and for I think for you two as a couple to feel like this is for us, not just for one of you and the other one is being supportive, for a long time. I know most people looked at this ministry in Costa Rica as, Will is the missionary because Yolanda's from here. So, I'm the one that left home and left family and all that kind of stuff. And she was just as fully invested in this as I am, but it always looked to people like this was kind of my thing. And think it's one of the things that I love the most about this counseling program that we have now is that's her thing. Like
Mm.
I just stay out of the way. And I think she feels finally like the gifts that she has and the way that God intentionally wired her for ministry is for exactly what she's doing right now. So it took us a while to get there, but it's like we're on the same page. And I just think it's really really neat that you guys got to kind of start out on the same page. Like nobody had to catch up with the other. If I'm hearing that right. Although you did mention that Nate wasn't really interested in leaving like family and those connections and that kind of, or hadn't thought about that. So was that Nate? Was that like how tough was it for you to transition from I can see myself leading worship in churches in Indiana for the rest of my life to being on a tiny island on the other side of
Look,
the
man,
planet?
I love new things as well. That's the other side of this is like I'm very adaptable. It's like it's actually my number one strength in Strengths Finders, if you know about that test. So give me a challenge or something new, and I'm like, let's do it. So it took me about 1 week to decide I wanted to move to New Zealand, and Whitney was more like a year later. We were on the same page. So
It's like, let's read some books and talk to some people and pray about it for a few months.
So yeah, I could have seen myself even moving to, she had an opportunity to go back to Italy, and I was like, well, I can try to find a way to
Mm-hmm.
do my thing there too. But it didn't ever really feel like it was a thing for both of us until New Zealand.
Yeah,
So
he was always very supportive of me following that dream. Um, but it just like it never felt right until the New Zealand thing came up. And people often ask us, why New Zealand? Why did you choose New Zealand? And we always say we didn't, God chose it for us. If you want to know why we're here, you're going to have to ask him because
yeah, it was more for us than us for New Zealand, I think.
So as you guys were going through the process early on of transitioning into life in New Zealand and starting the church, um, how Whitney, how do you feel like your studies were kind of came into play? Were there things that did you guys sit down and were like, okay, here's a list of things that we have to make sure that we don't do, and that's or I'm just what was that kind of interaction like for you? And I know there was a team involved. It wasn't just you
Mhm.
two. So was that like was your role in the team like was everyone just staring at Whitney saying, you drive, how do we do this? Or
Uh,
like how did that
yeah,
dynamic?
no, not at all. Partially because we had a Kiwi leading the team. So Hamish was born and raised in New Zealand. So my thought was always, we'll defer to him if he's got a cultural reference or a read on a situation like that's going to trump anything that I read in a book somewhere. So, and I think the thing about intercultural studies as a degree, it's impossible to study every culture or every people group around the world. It's really more about learning how to move yourself into the background, become an observer, put other people's thoughts and needs and experiences before your own, kind of giving you a set of tools to move in and out of other cultures, other belief systems, other languages in a way that is the least detrimental and the most honoring to God, and that doesn't put yourself and your own culture at the center. I definitely felt like I was coming in as a learner, as a student to observe and to learn from others. I think the things that did help were being able to recognize some signs of culture shock, knowing the stages of that, knowing how that was going to play out emotionally, and to be able to have a vocabulary around that, to be able to call it what it is. And it's not that I don't like being here, it's that I'm entering the second phase of culture shock, and it's going to look a lot different than the first phase. Things like that do apply pretty much everywhere.
That from my perspective was huge. Just understanding how to go through culture shock and having someone who understands what we're going to experience. She would say to us, it's normal to feel this way. We had a honeymoon phase with the new culture, and then all of a sudden it was like really hard, and then
Everything made us angry.
and it got great again. And so to have Whitney kind of walking us through that was massive. But also I think the biggest thing for me to have Whitney on the team was to help us understand our Americanness in a different culture, and how to, like she said, to kind of fade yourself into the background a little bit. And that was really hard for me because I'm not a background kind of person usually. And I had to learn the hard way sometimes, but there was a lot of wisdom in that. And I think I've, over 15 years, I've learned how to shed some of my we would often say to each other, your American is showing, like, just calm down a little bit.
There was another phrase that a friend of ours made up, which is, you need to be an American. You need to be aware of how American you are right now in this scenario. You need to be more aware of your Americanness, which is another phrase we still use quite often.
Which is just good life information anyway. Like, it has nothing to do with church planning or missionary work.
Yeah.
Like, that's just a good rule to live by. Just be aware of your
Yeah.
Americanness. I can remember after being in Costa Rica for several years, talking to another missionary that was here, and saying to him, I wish I could just be a normal church member, because I'm always Will the missionary. And I don't want to always be Will the missionary. I just want to be another guy sitting in the church, worshiping God and being a part of this community. And it was so hard sometimes, because it felt like every conversation that I was having with people was about the work that we're doing. And so I could never get away from it. When there were teams here working with us, it was that all the time. And then when the teams were leaving and we're just in church, it was still that all the time. And so that was a struggle for me. And when we started going to the church that my family currently goes to, we actually had a conversation with the pastor and his wife before we decided to make that move, and said, please do not shine a spotlight on us. Please don't even tell people what we do. They'll figure it out eventually, but just let us, can we just go to church for a while? Can we just go to church and that's it? And part of that's pretty selfish, but we need to go to church and just worship just like everybody else does. So when you were trying to, Nate, as hard as it was sometimes to be in the background, did you feel like people were still sort of pushing you towards the front, or did you feel like they could see what you were trying to do and were grateful for that and would let you?
I don't think that being pushed toward the front is a real problem in New Zealand.
Mm-mm.
They do a great job of pushing you down to back to where you belong.
It's kind of the whole tall poppy cultural phenomenon that you get in British Commonwealth countries. It's huge here, where if anything, they're going to cut you off at the knees and bring you down to thighs if you try to
Yeah.
push yourself up to the front. So
Which I think I said before.
As it should
Yeah,
be.
it was
As it should
was
be.
really helpful for me in my development, just as a person, just to be here and live here, and
Yeah.
adapt my personality to the culture. It's been really good. I love it now, the way that they interact with you. So no, we didn't have that issue, but we did want to blend in, but for a while, man, we just didn't, because we were fresh off the boat, as they say. Sometimes we're new to a new place, and sometimes you can't get around that.
Yeah,
But
and I think that that's okay. I don't think it's necessarily healthy either to go in and create a false sense of a new you because you're in a new place.
yeah,
To sort of fabricate a new identity or something. I think to push too hard for that is going to have its own negative consequences down the track.
but now I think we're genuinely like New Zealanders, or we're Kiwis in a way, because
We
like
call ourselves Amerikiwis.
Kiwis, like The Maori, which are the native people of New Zealand, they talk about your feet being woven into the fabric of the land. And I feel like now I can say, after 15 years, like I really do feel like I'm a part of New Zealand and it's a part of me. And that I didn't expect. And I'm so grateful, to call this place home now.
That reminds me of there's a slang word that Costa Ricans use. It doesn't get used in the church ever, but it's pretty close to just the word dude in English. Like in every way you can imagine using that word, as an exclamation, as a question, as a greeting, as a farewell. You can use it, in all those different ways, but not in the church. But I remember a friend here dropped me off at the airport, and as I'm walking off, that's what he called me as I was walking away. Like that's how he said goodbye to me. Was he used that word, and I was like, oh, really, really? Like I'm in.
Awesome.
But it just felt like to feel like I'm part of the community in spite of myself, in spite of all the reasons that I'm not. If he considers me that kind of friend in such an informal sense, the same way that he considers the other young guys in his neighborhood that he hangs out with friend, man, that felt so good. Because I think for me, I don't know if everybody deals with this, maybe this is one of those stages, but to feel almost like an imposter. I can make it look like I'm supposed to be here, but unless they think I'm supposed to be here, I'm not supposed to be here. And that to me was like an affirmation that it's okay for me to be here. You know what I mean?
You're accepted.
Do you all remember when was your first trip back to the US that was a visit rather than going home?
Yeah, I think for me, it was probably not our first furlough to the States, but our second, where I remember. So it would have been like we left in 2007, and I think this furlough was in 2012, where I remember coming back to New Zealand felt like coming home, and it felt like where we belonged. We had that sense of belonging here, not just being here. I think that's when it was for me.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it was because we had 2 kids by that point who had been born here, or if it was just because we had been here and had started a church and had that church community where we really felt a pretty strong sense of belonging in that church community. I don't know if that was why, if it was because all of the earthquakes that we had been through in Christchurch had, I think, really endeared that city and its people to us because we had been through such a harrowing experience together.
It was all harrowing. Having kids, planting a church, earthquakes. Like when you go through stuff like that, like intense stuff, like you tend to call that place home. And we still have a real, I guess, identity in Christchurch,
Yeah, I
in our
think we think
family.
of Christchurch as our
Which was
hometown in New Zealand.
We're in a different city now. We're in Auckland.
Even though we've actually spent more time in Auckland, more years in Auckland than in Christchurch. I think we still have that hometown feeling of Christchurch because of what we went through there and the deep connections we made with people.
And were your kids born in Christchurch?
2 of them were.
The boys were. Lane was born here in Auckland
before we moved.
Not long
there.
after we arrived, about 6 months after we moved here. And then the boys were both born in Christchurch. Yeah.
So when people ask them where they're from, they'll say Christchurch, New Zealand.
That's the question.
It's funny because, like Henry, if you ask him where he's from, he'll say America, even though he is not from America. Technically, he was born in Christchurch and has been raised in New Zealand and has visited the U.S. maybe 3 or 4 times in his 12 years of life. But he's just like where he's at right now, feeling about it, he'll say America. And I try not to correct him because they're each on their own journey as far as how they're working that side of their identity out in terms of nationality and culture and that sense of belonging for them.
But what's your sense if Henry were to move to the States? If we moved to the States, how would he feel? Like, would he feel like he actually fits in there?
Well, I can't say, but from what I've read about third culture kids and their experiences, that they tend to not really feel like they belong anywhere.
Well, that makes me think of something I learned in counseling classes, which is the people in your life. They say when you go into a relationship with any person, you sort of carry part of that person with you, and they shape you and mold you. And I feel like places can do that as well, because places are full of people who impact you. And I think that that's part of the conundrum of a third culture kid is like, where do I belong? I've been to so many different, I've belonged here, I've belonged there, but where do I really belong? Where is home? So if someone says, hey, you're going back home when we go to the States, it doesn't really feel right. But for our kids, maybe coming back here might not also feel like home. For me, I can say New Zealand feels like home to me now, but I don't think everyone else understands that, you know?
Yeah, even in our own family, Lane gets asked when she's going home, meaning to the States, when she's going to be able to visit back home, things like that. And it's really frustrating and, jarring for her because in her mind, this is home. She was born here. She's lived her whole life here. Why do people assume that this isn't her home? And it's, I think, because of her American accent, which she has inherited from us. And that's one of the things that we realized as well a few years ago is that no matter how long we are here, no matter how much we go through here, no matter how much we feel a sense of belonging here, as soon as we start speaking to everyone else, we're going to sound like an outsider, and we're going to be kind of thought of as an outsider unless they know us well, which most people aren't going to know. Most people that we meet aren't going to know us very well. They're always going to assume we're an outsider. And that was really hard, I think, because we had grown to love New Zealand so much and feel a real sense of belonging here, that it was hard realizing that that's not really ever going to go away because our accent isn't ever going to go away. And just coming to terms with accepting that about our experience here.
Our kids' accent might change or be a blend of the two, but ours won't.
So how does that come into play? I'm thinking about church leadership,
Mm.
and obviously that's something that involves speaking. And how do you deal with that? Because I've had the same thought. I mean, no matter how long I live in Costa Rica, I will always have been born in Eastern North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And no matter how good my Spanish gets and how well I can mimic a Costa Rican Spanish accent, I'll never be from here. I'll never have been born here. And I've been told by people that, yeah, you're one of us. But I mean, my passport says differently.
Mm.
So do you feel like that reality, has it mattered as far as being seen as leaders in the community, in the church community? Are there ways that maybe it's even helpful to kind of sometimes have sort of an outsider's perspective on things? There's a lot going on in the U.S. right now that I feel I'm so thankful I get to look at from where I am instead of being in the eye of the hurricane.
Mm.
I can actually look at it from a distance, and I think it changes my perspective.
First question for me
Yeah.
is about leadership in the church. How do you deal with that as someone who sounds different? And with us, we plant churches. So when you start a new church, up front, like in the early days, it's a lot of hands-on. You just have to do a lot of different things, and so we try to push people forward in that way.
I would say I think it's something that we've been very aware of. I've always tried not to assume that people are okay with our American influence. There are a lot of American voices up front in our church. And so I think one thing I'm often pushing for is Hamish is not American, but he went to Bible college in the US. And so his accent is quite a blend of the two, American and Kiwi. And so even he has all of the cultural references and the history and the understanding of it and the experience. But I think a lot of people assume that he is American as well, just because of his accent, which, as painful as it is for us, it's even more painful for him. Um, so I think I'm always kind of pushing for, let's get some voices up there that are not American voices, not because we've intentionally brought a lot of Americans into this church plant. We haven't done that at all, but it could easily look that way to other people who are coming in for the first time. So let's make sure we have a bit of diversity in there. We know that the people who know us love and accept us for who we are in spite of our Americanness. And so I think it's just coming to terms with the fact that we all bring things into relationships and into church and into leadership that we have no control over. For us, one of those things is our cultural background that we've emigrated with.
But we do have control over like the sort of resources that we use. Like if there's like a Bible study that's really American driven, maybe, and there's another option, maybe we go with the other option for that reason. Or a video, a clip that we want to show during the service on Sunday morning. If we find something that's a little more Australian or British or Kiwi inspired, then yeah, even better.
All of that, I think, raises some really important questions about leadership and authority. And Nate, you used the word tricky, and it is tricky because in a lot of cases, leadership and authority was either bestowed on someone or demanded because of where they were from. And so, how do you make sure that you're in a position of leadership and authority, in this case over a congregation, in a way that's healthy and is being affirmed by the congregation, that it's not just because of your passport that you're the guy up front. It's because right now you're the best one for the job, knowing that you're also looking for the next best one for that job, right? That's the whole point. How do you teach a church as as the outsiders that we are, that we're not standing up in front of them just because of where we're from? You know, that there's I mean, I think there has to be a lot of trust there. There has to be a lot of humility there. And those are things that I think there hasn't always been. When we talk about mission relationships and missionaries, you know, in parts of the world where those things were lacking and it didn't always go well.
Yeah. Kiwis are not afraid to ask hard questions to your face, you know. Um, Something I love about them. They'll cut straight to the point. And so one thing we have been asked many times is, why do you think you have the answers to the problems in New Zealand? You know, why do you think, like, what do you know that we don't know? That sort of thing. Um, and so we try to make it very clear that we don't think we have all the answers. We're learning alongside everyone else. We're not here because we think Americans are the solution to all the problems, or Americans have all the answers, or that Americans have figured out how to do church planting best or even church best. Because we're just here because, number one, God called us, and number two, we said yes. And everything else has kind of just been playing out of that.
And we're here to serve them. Um, and that's the thing about, I think uh, you have to understand your context as leaders of any organization, but as a church leader, like, where are you planting a church, and what is their reaction to leadership styles? And so in we just understand in New Zealand, to lead from a position of leverage doesn't work. I don't think that works very well anywhere, but especially here, like, to say, look, I'm from a certain place, or I have this title, so you have to listen to me. Like, no, you lead from a position of influence instead. So you blend in and also lead at the same time. It's possible to do that. It's possible to empower people and hear their voices and hear their opinions. I think Hamish does this really well. He and I lead our church together. He's so good at listening to others and hearing the opinion of the staff or something, and putting all that together and then suggesting a way forward. He's leading, but he's doing it in a way that's humble,
And collaborative.
collaborative. It's a real spirit of, like, everyone gets a voice, and I think New Zealand does that well, and we have to lead that way, or we have no one to lead.
It sounds really refreshing to be in the midst of a community and a culture where telling the truth, and people will just tell you the truth, you know, instead of telling you what they think you want to hear. Yeah.
Yeah, it is really refreshing to be here, I think, where people are down to earth, honest, fair. Like, fairness is a high cultural value, honesty is a high cultural value. And I mean, culture's always shifting, right? It's always moving and changing, but um, Yeah,
And
it is really refreshing and a great place to raise kids.
Mm.
and how relatable are those things to the gospel message?
Mm.
The telling the truth, the being fair and kind and honest. And I mean, that's what a gift to be able to draw straight lines from the message that we're offering to things that are already so there and present.
The flip side of that, Will, is it's because everything's so egalitarian in New Zealand and everyone's view matters. We have a very postmodern, post-Christian society where everything is true. Everything can be true if it's true for you, you know. And so,
Mm-hmm.
so that's a real challenge with that sort of society, because as the church, the followers of Jesus Christ, well, he's said some really solid truths that aren't very popular sometimes. So it comes with its challenges for sure.
Mm.
So, a big part of this podcast is talking about relationships and partnerships and healthy partnerships. What does it mean for you guys as a family unit to still have some sort of ties to these people who sent you and love you? And what does it mean to you as a family?
It means a lot, but I think the thing that means the most is when they love our kids. One thing that we've realized over the years is all of the sacrifices that we make, our kids make as well, but they don't get to choose it. You know, we have a bit of say in where we move and what we do. And they have none, you know, they kind of just are along for the ride. So you know, when we chose to move far away from family, we didn't know we were going to have kids at the time. We didn't know how, you know, what was going to happen with that. So we just made that decision based on our willingness to make that sacrifice. But by having children, we then pass down that sacrifice to them. You know, that's something they inherited from us, which isn't really fair,
Mm.
but is what it's our situation. And so, you know, they're old enough now to be aware of what they're missing out on. You know, when they're really young, they kind of are just toddling around, oblivious to it all. But they're old enough now that they realize, you know, all of our cousins are really close and we're not. You know, we're the odd ones out. We're the ones that don't really know them that well. They all get to spend weekends or weeks with the grandparents. We don't ever get to do that. They're much more aware of what our choices have cost them. And so when other people love on our kids, whether it's people here in our church or people overseas sending birthday cards to them and saying to them, thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for the sacrifices you're making. What you're doing is really great. I think that's wonderful because they are doing it as well. You know, they are coming along. They are helping set up the church literally and figuratively. Like they're literally there helping us with setup on Sundays and pack down, and they have responsibilities too. They've made sacrifices as well. I think especially when people take care of our kids, that's really meaningful to us because
Mm.
it says we see them as well. They're not just part of a family unit, they're individuals who are going through this experience too.
Yeah, we definitely can. Our family can relate to that too, and something that has started, I think, to weigh more heavily on me as time goes on by is it's not just the sacrifices that our daughter is making, but it's also the sacrifices that the rest of our family
Mm.
we're requiring them to make too. It's not just about the cost involved for us who have chosen to be here or for our daughter who didn't choose to be here but is here with us, but also the cost of the other people who who love her and love us and because of the choices we've made have also been forced to sacrifice that kind of time. Uh,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard.
has there been a particular moment that you have realized just how far away from family that you are?
Yeah, both of our mothers were diagnosed with cancer in 2017, and we
Mm.
quickly um, began to realize how much we are not there for them, you know, how
Mm-hmm.
much we are not supporting our aging parents, our siblings who, you know, have very stressful lives for one reason or another, who are then trying to support our aging parents and now our mothers who are sick and starting to go through chemo and doing all of that, not just like the logistical side of it, but also the emotional heartache side of carrying that and, having to be the one to go over and shave your mother's head. Like my twin sister had to do that and wept after it. And like I was completely ignorant of the fact that it was even happening that day. She had to carry that on her own
Yeah.
because I'm here. And so I think when that happened, all of that became a lot more real in front of mine. And there's a great deal of guilt around not being able to be there for them, especially when something like an illness or an injury or a recovery or maybe a spiritual crisis or an emotional crisis or something like that comes up for them, and knowing that we're not the ones who are going to be there to support them through that. Someone else is going to have to do it.
Whitney, what is the one thing that you wish people would ask you that they never ask you?
Hmm.
Or one thing you wish people knew about you that they don't?
I think I wish people here knew how much New Zealand means to me, how much we've grown to love this place and love the people here and love the culture. Every culture has aspects that you love more and love less. But I guess I want people to know that we have a real heart for this place and a heart for the people who are here,
Hmm.
and that it means so much to us. Yeah, that they've welcomed us into this place and that we can be here.
Wow, Will. One thing that I love about all of our mission partners is it is so clear to see their heart of compassion for the people that they work with, their hearts of love for God and for the people that they work with. And I think that's came out so very clear in Whitney's testimony into her calling. One of the things that I want to bring up is her idea of culture shock. I think it is so easy for us to think of, oh, well, they've gone to New Zealand. They're not having to worry about anything. They just have to go and they don't have to worry about language barriers. They're just going to fit right in seamlessly. This is still culture shock. These are things that we're not used to. And it takes on this act of humility and the way that they have to recharge, reset their minds so that they can go into the culture knowing that there are still so many things that they need to learn and how they can grow and be a part of this people. So I really did appreciate her transparency of feeling culture shock when she arrived in New Zealand. And a second thing that I picked up on in her interview was that Whitney said she loves it when people love her children. She
Hmm.
loves when people take care of her children. And that's one thing that we at First United Methodist Church in our global missions ministry and our local missions ministry have really focused in on that. Yes, we want to care for the missionaries, the frontline workers, but your family is just as important. We want to love your children as much as you love your children, and we want to create a family atmosphere for them as much as we do for you. So we publish their birthdays. We try to make sure they get birthday cards. If there's a little something we can put in the mail or deliver to you, that's what we'll do to make them feel special and so that they know that someone loves them, that there is a church that is praying for them and loving them. And that's what I did love about our time in Italy so much is that we had cultivated a relationship enough with your daughter Isabella that you trusted us to keep her for almost 24 hours.
With fear and trembling, but yes.
And we loved every second of that day.
Yeah, no, I mean we've definitely been on the receiving end of that from you guys and from other partners, and we have no idea what we're doing to our child. We don't know how over time she will experience being a missionary child, and we're aware that there will be some challenges that will come with that. But at the very least, we know that she is surrounded by people who love her, and she knows that. And to already see that in an 8 year old, and how excited she gets when she finds out that people who she knows are coming back to Costa Rica, or that we are going to visit people that she knows and loves, and knows that they love her. It's at least, I think, we're getting that part right. So when Whitney said how much it means to her when people love my children, I just thought, oh my gosh, yeah, totally. There was one more thing, Ashley, that I want people to hear, that Whitney talked about at the very end of our interview, and it has to do with language. And you've already mentioned culture shock, but just part of that transitioning process into the mission field, and their experience was so different from my experience that it's why my ears kind of perked up when she started talking about this. So I'm going to play just these last few minutes of our interview, and then we'll come back and talk some more about it.
One of the things that has been really surprising is realizing how much of a disadvantage we were at coming over, moving from one English speaking context to another English speaking context. I think we thought of that as like a huge advantage. And in a lot of ways, it was. We could start making friends straight away. We could start having those deeper conversations. We could launch right into that. But over the years here, and especially watching other people come and watch them kind of go through those first few years as well, I've realized actually, I think we're at a bit of a disadvantage. If we had gone to plant a church in southern France, we would have spent our first 2 years in language school. And during those first 2 years, you're learning the language, you're learning the nuance of the language, but you're also through that learning the nuance of the culture. And I think that 2 year pause that a lot of missionaries or church planters have at the beginning of their time in a new place is a really beautiful and beneficial thing that they have for setting themselves up for success down the road.
Hmm.
And when you move into an English speaking context, there's kind of this assumption, well, you can get started straight away. You can just jump right in. You can plant your church a lot faster, a lot sooner, even if there aren't people who are putting pressure on you to do things quickly, at least verbally. There's still that assumption that there's pressure, to kind of start getting results quickly, start getting some things going. Got to have stuff to put in the newsletter to send back. We can't just say we're learning, about the culture. We got to say we're doing this and that.
Hmm.
And I think that kind of pressure, whether it's self inflicted or externally inflicted, drives people to jump in really quickly when they don't have that language learning phase to go through.
Yeah.
So I think that was something that has been surprising to me that I've realized over the years, both from our own experience and from the experience of others, that I think we need to allow missionaries, church planters, no matter what their project is, allow them, even encourage them to take those first 2 years to just be sponges, just absorb, just be a learner. Don't commit to anything yet. Don't start priority listing yet. Just go in and find out what that culture has to teach you.
Okay, so Ashley, can you talk about this from like the local church standpoint? I mean, what is it that you in the church, as a leader in the local church who is nurturing these kinds of partnerships, what do you expect in that kind of a relationship?
Right. So, as we talked about in, I think it was our intro episode, that we really, as a missions committee, had to go through a time of learning ourselves. What is it that we wanted to focus in on? How did we want to support the missionaries best? How did we want to be a part of their lives? What did we expect from them? How important it was for us to understand that our mission partners need time to learn and to grow and to abide in the communities where they serve. Now, some of the partners that we've had have been there for a long time, and others were just getting started out. But no matter the case, it's still important for them to have time to learn and grow and be part of the communities. It's not about the numbers, how many people are saved, or how many services you've held, or how many projects you've done. Those things are very important, but they are fruit of the abiding relationships that you have in the community. I think that while all of that is important, especially in those first few months that they are actually physically living in the community, there needs to be time to rest. Not a time to report on how you've been spending their day, but a time to learn and observe. Not a time to push, push, push and give me something, give me some kind of report or some kind of narrative so that I can give it to my church. But give yourself a time to breathe, to learn, and to grow, to abide and be part of that community, and then naturally learning how to serve out of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And what you say and what she said really, it makes me reflect on when I first got to Costa Rica, and um, especially what she said about language and how what seemed like an advantage for them, or what was going to be an advantage for them, actually it might not have been. And what I experienced when I moved here, I spoke Spanish. I spoke Spanish well enough to kind of get around sort of everyday life. But I moved here 2 days after I graduated from seminary, where for the previous 3 years, I had been in this very intense academic setting, having these really challenging and deep theological conversations with professors and with other students. And I definitely did not have the language skills to be able to engage in those kinds of conversations here. And I can remember being really frustrated by that early on, and just feeling like my tongue was tied. But after listening to Whitney, I think maybe that was actually a blessing, because it forced me to shut up. It forced me to just be quiet for a while and learn the culture here, learn religious culture here, and start to pick up the religious and the theological vocabulary. I mean, who knows what kind of damage I might have done, or what kind of confusion I might have caused, if I had just jumped right into that when I was, just like Nate said, fresh off the boat. So I was really thankful to hear her talk about that way, and it just makes me rethink kind of how I retrospectively analyze what my first year or so of being frustrated by the conversations that I wasn't able to have with people, what that means, and how actually that might have been a really, really good thing for me.
And how we can continue to put that into practice as we move forward into the lives of our communities, and acting with that spirit of humility. I think that that's ultimately part of how we make the broken banquet whole again.
Yeah.
Well, what a great episode here, Will. Let's pat ourselves on the back. That was a great conversation with Whitney and Nate Hutchison. They are great, great people serving in Auckland, New Zealand. So let's be in
Did you
prayer for
just
them.
did you just literally pat yourself on the back?
I did. Did you
Good.
saw it, didn't you? Yeah,
Yeah.
I
No,
patted
I
myself.
didn't.
Yeah.
I didn't. Hang on. Okay.
That's a good pat on the back. Well, listeners, we appreciate you being with us as we seek to understand how we can be part of making the broken banquet whole again. So thanks, Will. Appreciated you. Appreciated Nate and Whitney. And thanks for taking the lead on that interview.
Yeah, people may have noticed that you were awfully quiet during that interview, Ashley, and it's because, unfortunately, because of a scheduling conflict, you were not able to join us that day for the interview. But I was blessed to be able to have them all to myself for a little while, and it was great to talk to them again.
All right. Well, we'll have a great day. Good to be with you.
See you, Ashley.
Bye, Will. You've been listening to The Broken Banquet, a podcast by Will Bailey and Ashley Goad. Music provided by Irene and the Sleepers. Join us next week for another episode. He's prepared the table. All things are ready. Come to the feast.